Hey, good afternoon everyone. Chris Dime here, the founder of Dime & Associates. We're a financial planning firm dedicated to working with folks to and through retirement. That being said, I thought today would be timely to cover Roth conversions. There's some changes going on in the tax environment over the next few years, as well as the markets aren't cooperating as much as we'd all like them to, which actually presents some opportunities. So stick around, we'll explain why. So today I thought we'd cover what is a Roth conversion, why would you ever do a Roth conversion, when's the best time to do a Roth conversion, and then when is not the best time to do a Roth conversion. So let's jump in. Number one, what is a Roth conversion? So a Roth conversion is when you voluntarily take pre-tax money and move that money into a post-tax account. For example, let's say you had a pre-tax IRA on the balance sheet and you wanted to move that into a Roth IRA, you can totally do that. Doesn't matter how much money you make, doesn't matter how much you convert. The only downside is the price of admission to do that is you have to pay income taxes on the amount that you convert. So if you convert 100 grand, think of it as if you just got a $100,000 bonus from work. You're gonna have to pay income taxes on that money. So number two, why would you ever do this strategy? The simplest answer is to pay less in tax over your lifetime or the lifetime of your heirs, because it's not just about you with these retirement accounts. Somebody most likely will be inheriting them if you've planned well and you don't plan to bounce your final check to the undertaker at the end of your life. I would imagine there's probably going to be some residual monies left over for you to pass on to the next generation. And if that's the case, the next generation would probably appreciate inheriting money that they don't have to pay income taxes on. So when would it be the right time to consider doing a Roth conversion? The easiest one to think about is if your tax rates are going to be higher in the future than they are today. Let's say you're at the 24% income tax bracket today, but you anticipate in the next few years you're going to get that promotion or the business is going to take off and you're going to jump up to the 32% tax bracket. Well, if that's the case, it might make sense to consider doing Roth conversions ahead of that promotion, because you'll pay a smaller amount in taxes today when you make that conversion than you would if you did the Roth conversion after that promotion. In addition, if you're living off of a certain amount of income right now while you're working, but you anticipate in retirement you're going to live off a much higher amount of income, well, that's probably going to affect which income tax bracket you fall into, and that might also be some good fodder for making a Roth conversion ahead of time. One common time we're finding doing retirement planning with clients when a Roth conversion is fairly advantageous is from the day they retire. Let's say it's late 50s, early 60s, but before they're pulling Social Security at usually age 70 is when we're having clients delay until. There's around a 10-year gap between when they retire and stop earning their prior income to when they're pulling Social Security, which is another income stream. And so that 10-year gap is a phenomenal opportunity to layer in Roth conversions over a 10-year time horizon and really spread out that tax liability. Another variable to consider as to whether or not a Roth conversion is right for you is when you examine your long-term retirement plan and you see at the age of 72 and beyond, you're going to start getting hit with required minimum distributions. And as a quick refresher, that's when the IRS forces you to take money out of retirement accounts. Most of our clients today don't need their required minimum distributions to pay all their bills. It's kind of more so of a nuisance, and it definitely is taxable income they don't want, which turns into taxes that they have to pay that they'd rather not. And so when doing the calculation ahead of time, if we anticipate required minimum distributions are going to happen down the line, it might make sense to consider doing some Roth conversions ahead of time so as to get rid of required minimum distributions in the future, because as a reminder, you don't pay required minimum distributions out of a Roth IRA. That ultimately means that the money gets to compound and grow longer inside of a tax-deferred environment, which mathematically, if you had a taxable account versus a tax-free account like a Roth IRA, the same amount of money invested the same way, the Roth IRA money will have a larger ending balance because there's no nuisance of capital gains taxes every year. If you're thinking about your heirs inheriting one of these retirement accounts, I would imagine any heir would much rather inherit a tax-free account than a pre-tax IRA that they have to pay taxes on when they inherit the money. I'll push out a video later on about the different ways that required minimum distributions get levied on the next generation who inherit these types of accounts. But to just keep it simple, if you're going to inherit funds, you'd much rather inherit tax-free money than money that you're going to have to pay taxes on. Because what if you're in the highest earning income years of your life and you just inherited a bunch of money? That's awesome. I mean, obviously nobody's going to lick a gift horse in the mouth, but that is still taxes you're going to have to pay on that inheritance. Whereas if it was all tax-free, you don't have to pay any taxes. Another variable to consider when planning for Roth conversions is how a taxable income in retirement from a pre-tax account could affect your provisional income. And that's what the IRS uses to dictate how much taxes you owe on your Social Security income. Despite the misconception, Social Security income isn't always tax-free. And odds are, if you're not solely living off of Social Security, you're probably going to have to pay some level of taxes on the Social Security income you're receiving, up to 85% as of 2022. That calculation is half your Social Security benefits plus your adjusted gross income, and adjusted gross income is directly increased by how much you're taking out of your pre-tax accounts. Whereas if you only had money coming in from a Roth account, it wouldn't throw off your adjusted gross income numbers, therefore you'd pay less in tax in your Social Security income. So doing Roth conversions ahead of time could decrease the amount of taxes you owe on your Social Security income when you start pulling Social Security. Another variable to consider is Medicare, specifically IRMA surcharge premiums. IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. You have to pay more money for your Medicare if you make more money. And the calculation to decide if you make too much money is your adjusted gross income. And what is directly affected by adjusted gross income we just talked about? It's any distributions you have from a pre-tax account. So again, it might make sense to do Roth conversions ahead of time to reduce the effect your adjusted gross income will have on Medicare surcharges. Another variable to consider when doing Roth conversions is if the markets are up or down. I'm not a huge fan of market timing. It's just coincidental that here in 2022, the markets are at a relative low. It's very similar to buying low when you're doing a Roth conversion at a down market. Similar to buying stocks, if you anticipate stocks being higher than they are today, let's say 10 years from now, if you think the stock market's going to be up, mathematically you'd want to invest a bunch of money right now because you're buying those stocks at a discount. If you anticipate your retirement accounts being much higher in the future, same thing with Roth conversions. It might make sense to do some Roth conversions while the markets are at a low and convert theoretically a much larger dollar amount than if you waited for both accounts to be up and then you look to do some Roth conversions. Going back to the first variable relative to tax rates, there's a couple of things I think you should consider. Number one, we know in 2026, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax rates will sunset. Barring any other future legislation, that's kind of a given. For most people, that's going to result in a much more confiscatory tax environment, and confiscatory is just your $10 word for the day, which means the IRS is going to take more of your money. In that environment, it would probably make sense to consider doing some Roth conversions ahead of time. Again, when you do the math and you think about where your tax rates are going to be, if your tax rates are going to be higher in 2026 and beyond, it might make sense to consider doing some Roth conversions today. The other tax prognostication I'll do is mathematically, if our government is in debt, there's only two ways to pay for that debt: increase revenue and decrease expenses. It doesn't appear as if decreased expenses is going to happen anytime soon, especially with some recent bills that have been passed over the past couple of years. And so increased revenue is where a lot of folks think that the government is going to have to derive their money from. What's the number one source that a lot of people think about when it comes to increasing government revenue? Taxation. So if you think that tax rates are going to be higher between now and 20 years from now, it probably makes sense to consider doing some Roth conversions ahead of time at a known tax rate, today's, versus an unknown future tax rate, which a lot of folks are prognosticating is going to be much higher than they are right now. So when should you not do a Roth conversion? One of the times that I would absolutely not recommend doing Roth conversions to clients is when they think their tax rates are going to be lower in the future than they are today. For example, if you're making 500 grand today, but in retirement you want to live off of 100 grand a year, that large of a disparity, the math probably isn't going to make any sense to do Roth conversions today. The smaller that disparity, it might still actually make sense given some of those other variables we just talked about, but most of the time the math really doesn't pan out. Another environment when I would absolutely not recommend doing Roth conversions is when you are financially tight. And what I mean by that is if you don't have the liquidity to pay the taxes on that Roth conversion, the math probably isn't going to make sense, because in order to free up liquidity or cash to pay the taxes on the Roth conversion, the last thing you want to do is take money out of a retirement account just to pay those taxes. And so if you don't have cash on hand or inside of a liquid account like a taxable investment account, it probably is not going to be in your best interest to force a Roth conversion at this time. Lastly, a few things to cover before we end. If you're currently pulling required minimum distributions, Roth conversions do not satisfy required minimum distributions. You have to pull out your required minimum distribution, then you can Roth convert as much as you want. But the IRS still mandates that you take out a required minimum distribution. As always, speak with your tax professionals because it's more nuanced than just, am I in a higher tax bracket today? There's some other things to think about. That being said, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat below. I'll try to get to them. If you're curious about how this affects your direct situation, send me a message. We'll get you squared away. Other than that, have an awesome rest of the week. We'll talk to you all later.